Hello and welcome back. And this is the last session of the day, undergraduate students' well-being and the impact of COVID-19. And I would like to introduce the chair and the moderator of the session, Sarah Schultz Robinson, Assistant Director for Institutional Research and Analytics at the University of Virginia. Sarah, floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm super excited to be here. The session today is on undergraduate students' well-being and the impact of COVID-19. I have been really struck by the discussion so far today, how much the focus has been on the individual student and how much everyone has been taking that into consideration as they present their scholarship, especially really going back to the first plenary session where we got to hear from individual students. So I think it's remarkable that we do this huge survey, and we survey thousands of students on our campuses, and then collectively tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of students. But when we talk about their experience, or at least what I've seen today, we talk about our individual students and what their lived experience is like and what they bring individually with them as they interact with each of our individual institutions. So I'm really looking forward to continuing in that spirit with this session. We have colleagues from UC Berkeley, Texas A&M, HSE, University Moscow, and from the University of Minnesota. So I'm going to start by handing it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. And then I have a few questions to start our discussion, and then we can open it up to the greater group to ask questions. Again, please use the chat or raise your hand, or just simply, if you feel comfortable, unmute and ask questions. So thank you again for joining. And I'm going to have Igor start and start the introduction. So Igor,
Sure.
over to you.
I've already introduced myself once. I'm Zero Consortium Director and Senior Researcher at the CSHE at UC Berkeley. And basically, the study that I've presented, it looks at the relationship between online learning experiences and the sense of belonging. And I think understanding this relationship is important because prior studies, they often looked, and we often think of, campus climate and sense of belonging in relation to physical campus, in relation to in-person connections that we make, in-person experiences that we make. And there's limited knowledge and lack of scholarship in terms of how digital experiences affect and related to the sense of belonging. And even, after, we all hope that, when the pandemic is over, we go back to some extent, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of digital experiences are here, will stay with us, and will stay in, to some extent, in a hybrid modality. And I think that will be an increasingly important aspect of kind of a sense of belonging. And I use data on Zero COVID-19 survey, and I find that basically three sets of findings. One is there was no noticeable decrease in the kind of or impact of the pandemic on the sense of belonging, and this is true across different subgroups. I think that's actually good news. And but second, we see that there are significant disparities in both student sense of belonging and how students adapted to online instruction. And we see a strong correlation between those two, between the adaptation to online instruction and the sense of belonging, even after we control for student characteristics. And I think one of the most interesting findings from the study is that there was a strong negative correlation between the sense of belonging on one hand and the experiences of instances kind of bullying and harassment during the online classes. We don't have a lot of students who experience that, but for those who experience that, it's actually very negatively impacted their sense of belonging, which probably makes sense. And so basically, I discussed one of the the things that I discussed is that instructors and university administrators, they need to directly address and prevent kind of online bullying, microaggressions, harassment in classes, to make sure that all students are welcomed in an online environment.
Thanks, Igor. Turn it over to Alyssa and her team at Texas A&M. They presented Creating Accessible Connections, COVID-19 Impact on College First Year Programming.
Howdy, y'all. Sorry, howdy is the greeting of Texas A&M, and I am in full new student conference mode today. So I'm the only one of my team currently joining me. The others are meeting with students across the hall. So I guess to summarize what I do in just a few words, we all wear a lot of hats, but I work specifically for the College of Science here at Texas A&M. Saw howdy in the chat, that's awesome. And I run our programs specifically focused on retention. So historically, that's been first year experience, and moving forward, we're also going to be expanding into transfer year experience. But I presented on our first year experience, and our college has a specific program to support our students and to focus on self-efficacy, self-awareness, a sense of purpose, becoming actively engaged, and also becoming socially integrated within the campus, college and departmental communities. And I really looked at, with our presentation and our research we've been doing this last year on our students, is what they needed specifically while we were in the pandemic for science students, specifically in our college. These are students who were expecting either first year to be very hands-on in labs and in laboratories, and also to feel that sense of, I guess, community within even the labs. And so when we put it all online, I know we were really worried about our retention numbers. So we kind of buckled down and really focused on our peer mentorship within our first year experience model, and how our peer mentors could really support our students. And so what that was listening to our students and to know their needs. And so we could make very quick changes, and it really resulted in some powerful outcomes. Now, we measured a lot of them with academic outcomes, looking at retention, term GPA, and then even looking a little bit more in relation to pre-COVID cohorts in terms of comparison. But our students are still making great gains, and they just kind of followed suit with our cohorts and increasing our retention to the college, which was just so beautiful. And while the pandemic is not over, as a public Texas university, we are coming fully back in person with no remote options currently planned for fall 2021. And so I would just like to say, with everything we've learned over this last year, especially within this programming model of utilizing our peer mentors and really listening to our students and their first year needs online, it's given us a lot of great ideas about how to make our curriculum and our programming more accessible and more inclusive. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Alyssa. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Irina at HSE University Moscow. She presented on the challenges of distance learning to student mental health.
Hello, everyone. My name is Irina Shiglova, and I am a researcher at HSE Moscow, Russia. And I'm happy to see everyone here, at least virtually this year. And together with my colleagues, Oksana Dremova and Ksenia Velkova, we would like to share the results of our study based on this Euro-COVID data. And first of all, I just would like to say some words about the topic of our study. It must be said that students' well-being and mental health in Russia haven't been an issue of serious concern. It's not that Russian students are mentally strong, but in the Russian higher education system, it is supposed that students should bear the intensive academic workload without complaints. They should work hard towards their academic degree. And before, university administration has never asked us for the statistics on students' well-being and mental health. Therefore, we didn't collect it until 2020. And in March last year, all Russian universities, as well as other universities around the globe, had to move online, all classes online. And we conducted this survey in the late spring. And the topic of students' mental health and well-being became one of the central issues. And as our results showed, that the majority of HSC students, they were stressed during that time. 90% of students experienced stress. And this stress was related mostly to the new learning environment. And although the majority of HSC students, they already had some experience with massive online open courses, 90% of students, they mentioned obstacles associated with the new learning environment. And the most common obstacles were a lack of communication with other students, lack of access to the instructors, and also lack of motivation. But however, we did find some positive things about the distant learning format. For example, more than 40% of students replied that they had more time for studying, and a quarter of students said that they could attend online classes more regular than offline classes, and a third of students said that they enjoyed learning in the new format. So this is briefly about our study. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The final panelists are Krista Soria and Bonnie Horgos from the University of Minnesota, and they presented on the factors associated with college students' mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. I will make a brief introduction about regarding myself, and then I will pass it over to Krista. My name is Bonnie Horgos. I use she, her pronouns. And just a little bit of personal information. I just completed my MSW at the University of Minnesota, and I will be continuing on to get my PhD. So in addition to that, I've been the graduate research assistant at CERU for almost 2 years now. So I'm really passionate about mental health and how how COVID-19 has been impacting our students. And I'd be happy to answer any questions related to any of those pieces. Krista, do you want to take over?
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Hi, everyone. I'm Krista Soria. I use she, her pronouns. It's been really nice to be a part of this conference and to see so many familiar faces or little black boxes on Zoom because I've had the pleasure of working with many of you for over a decade now. So thanks for having us here. Bonnie and I published a paper in the Journal of College Student Development. We've also presented this study at NASPA, ACPA, and AERA as well. And so we've kind of been shopping it around, but essentially we studied the experiences of undergraduate students during the pandemic with a specific focus on their mental health as measured by the PHQ-2 and the GAD-2, which are measures of clinically significant symptoms for major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. First, we found that in our undergraduate sample, and we used one of the earlier samples that we received from the CERU COVID-19 pandemic from 8 large public research universities. We found 35% of those students met those clinically significant symptoms for major depressive disorder, and 39% met the clinically significant symptoms for generalized anxiety disorder, which are much higher than what we've seen pre-pandemic across the nation. So that's a concerning point first. Second, we investigated whether there might be some relationship between some demographic variables, individual variables, interpersonal variables, institutional variables, financial stressors, and academic stressors. And by and large, what we found in the study is that students typically from minoritized sexual orientation identities like pansexual, queer students, students who prefer not to describe their sexual orientation, those students were much more likely to have increased odds of experiencing those clinically significant symptoms. Additionally, caregivers, those who experienced food and housing insecurity, were also more likely to have some of those symptoms for generalized anxiety disorder. We see about the same with major depressive disorder as well, with caregivers, students with disabilities, students from lower social class backgrounds, and then students from minoritized sexual orientations as well, being having those increased odds of those symptoms. One big takeaway that might be really interesting to talk about is that we found that students who experienced were more likely to essentially say that they felt like they were valued at their institution, they had a higher sense of belonging at their institution. Those who felt more supported by their institutions during the pandemic actually had decreased odds of those clinically significant symptoms for both generalized anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder. And so that might be kind of interesting to talk about, like, how do we create those supportive campus environments to help students feel supported, especially during these really challenging and traumatic times. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Krista. That's actually where I'm going to start, is with this idea of sense of belonging. I was really struck by the two threads that I felt went through all four panelists' presentations. And it's the effect of the sort of the academic effects on students' well-being, and then the non-academic effects. So starting with the academic effects, Igor, I was reminded about the strength of that connection of sense of belonging with academic achievement. And I noticed that you mentioned the obstacles to online learning and the relationship with sense of belonging. Those top obstacles that had the strongest relationship were academic. It was that, or harassment within an online class. Also, Krista and Bonnie, you talked about also access to academic advising, expectations from instructors having this effect on anxiety and depression. And Irina, you mentioned as well the format of distance learning actually affecting the actual format that distance learning creates can affect well-being. And then I was really interested in what Texas A&M is doing to academically support students in the first year. So I'd like to open it up to the panelists to talk, expand a little bit more if you'd like on these academic factors that influence students' well-being, and what might be working at your institution, or what you might like to do. I don't want to limit it to what's happening. Also, if you have aspirational ideas about how we improve students' well-being, again, focusing on the academic side, I'd like to open it up to discussion.
Do you have the order in mind you would like us to?
Sure, Igor, let's start talking
right. about
a sense of belonging. That's
All right.
a good.
I think this is a great kind of a this is, we continue the discussion we have at the previous session where we discussed campus climate in student experiences. I think what happened during COVID at a lot of universities is student experience became much more limited than before. And basically, some students even joke that they are attending a Zoom university now because so much is happening in Zoom. And that, and the experience basically, shrank to the academic experience, to a lot of it, not completely, but, close to that. And of course, campuses try to support other areas of their life, but it's in some things it's really challenging. And we had, student panel reporting the same thing. It's just, more challenging to engage in extracurricular activities, more like there's no campus, there's no physical space. And I think that's kind of an important factor that contributed to the relationship between academic experiences and everything else that, other kind of indicators of student, mental health, wellness, sense of belonging. And that's why, you know, I try to argue that online experiences, the quality of online experiences matter, because if you have, you know, instructors who are, you know, who check in on you, who are understanding, who, you know, would like to spend some time. I know Krista done a lot of, you know, nice and innovative things as an instructor, you know, trying to also support their students. If that's happening online, then it, you know, helps students to feel they are welcomed, because the only place they can be welcomed is basically Zoom, right? So all this interactions, I think their importance increased tremendously.
Alyssa, would you like to add a little bit more about the program that Texas A&M is running to academically support students and what you found to be successful?
Absolutely. So Texas A&M is a really large public university in Texas, obviously. And with our first year experience program being so heavily focused on community, moving those communities to online spaces, you know, you think classes of 25 students, yeah, there's a bunch of them, but that would be a pretty easy move. And we really found, I mean, maybe more so than other subjects, like what has worked to create community and those great academic outcomes that we've been measuring for years just did not work over Zoom immediately. And so that's why we leaned so strongly into using our peer mentors. They were the great connector piece of knowing, you know, we think about near peer models as beneficial in a lot of ways, but especially during the pandemic. Like, what are you experiencing? How have you been, you know, cultivating these really great success strategies to make it through not just introductory bio, but, you know, really tough OChem and those tough classes that, you know, your mentees are just experiencing just a taste of. And so we leaned heavily on using our peer mentors, not only for their voice, but for their impact with students, creating relationships. You know, their meetings with students, not only within because our peer mentors are within our small group classrooms, they also meet with their students outside of the classroom. And so we really got to lean on them to help us, you know, how do we do this in a classroom setting to really help you cultivate the fun breakout rooms and stuff? Because we've all been in a breakout room where nothing happened, unfortunately, like no community is built, nothing productive has happened. But also, how do we use them outside of the class to feel like they still belong to this university? They're still an Aggie, and they're making really great academic progress when, you know, for some of our students, especially in the fall semester of 2020, we had one of our largest freshman classes yet. And so it's just kind of heartbreaking to see a student's first semester experience be fully online, maybe from their parents' living room or supporters' living room. But those peer mentors is really where we said, okay, how do we utilize y'all? And that was a lot of thinking on our feet and you know, kind of surveying what everyone else is doing and just seeing how it worked for our students, but really handing over the ownership to our peer mentors and saying, what would be useful for you? What would you want right now? And how do we make that happen? And I was really blessed to be in a position where my college not only trusts me, but allows me to make those quick changes, and it allows us to just say, we're going to reformat this right now. And we had really great outcomes for our students. So I'm very thankful for our peer mentors. And because of that culture we built, I would say even just going a little further into sense of belonging, I just hired for fall 2021. And my freshman class, who was online in fall 2020, showed up in a big way. I had to deny 100 more students than I usually have to for peer mentor applications. And so not only were students who were first year students wanting to be further a part of this, but they wanted to be a part of it in a big way by being a mentor to another incoming student. So we considered that like a little, that just happened a couple weeks ago, but that was like another little win. Like not only did we do an okay job, but we also influenced that culture in sense of belonging within our college.
That's great. I was really impressed by the peer mentor model that you were using when you mentioned the numbers of students that you were serving. What a big school you have and how many students you serve, and that you were able to get these small classes and have this individual instruction because you had the support of this incredible peer mentor team. It was really impressive. And it's great to hear that this culture, you know, you feel like it will continue, because I think that's another thread through this discussion and the discussions we're having all day today and tomorrow, which is what have we learned as we've been operating within the pandemic that we can take forward. So Irina, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to the academic pieces that influence students' well-being. I thought it was interesting that you talked about both positive and negative aspects, that you have some students that really liked the online format and felt that they were doing well in it. But then there were also students that were really struggling. So I'd like to give you a chance to respond.
Sarah, thanks a lot. I just want to quickly answer John's question. He asked me in chat. So yes, hello, John. First of all, yes, you're right that the majority of Russian students, they live maybe in the suburbs of Moscow, and the dormitories, for example, they spread out around the Moscow as well. And it might take around 2 hours to get to the HEC building, and also buildings are spread out around the city, and so students could save about 2 hours when they didn't commute to the university. And regarding your second question, the thing is, I think in this spring, all students returned to school, and we actually had classes, partially hybrid and partially online. But now the number of positive COVID cases started increasing. But the thing is that the school is almost over, and all students, they almost passed all exams. Yes, and actually today, it was announced by our government that in Moscow there will be like obligatory vaccination. So I don't know what will be the reaction, but we see that people kind of surprised. And now I'm going to answer the Sarah's question. So as we found out that emotional ties are very important for students. And the majority of them suffered from lack of face-to-face communication, absence of peer feedback, and actually they missed the atmosphere of physical campus. As we know that nothing is constant except change, and what our students did, not our university administration, students could organize themselves, and they created HEC Minecraft. It's an online platform, like a big project that brings together all students to HEC campuses under one virtual roof, so they could communicate with each other, and they created a small HEC for themselves.
Thank you. I really enjoyed learning about that, the HSC Minecraft that was created. And it, again, in thinking about moving forward, there are these opportunities where I feel like while some types of community have been more difficult during the pandemic, for others, there's a greater accessibility to community because of the virtual environment, and that there's some opportunities there as well. And I thought that was a great example of that. So thank you for sharing, Irina. Krista and Bonnie, I would love to hear your thoughts about these really strong relationships of some of these academic variables to both anxiety and depression during the pandemic. I was I don't know that I was surprised, but it was still shocking how high these numbers were. It is concerning. It concerns me moving forward. I don't think that everyone's just going to, come out of the pandemic and those numbers are just going to go way down. I think we're going to be dealing with the effects of this for a while. So I'm interested in particularly some of the interventions that you mentioned that can be helpful for students. But really, all of these academic study space, academic advising, all of this access, and particularly the way you broke it down, if you could speak to that, and then also interventions that you would like to see or that you have that are working.
Maybe I'll just begin by offering that as an instructor myself, I'm very intentional about my use of like a trauma-informed teaching approach, in which I have my classes like highly structured with the ability to have flexibility for individual students who might need additional time or additional assistance with work. I also am very intentional about beginning every class period by offering some type of tip or resource about mindfulness. And I use an example on the right in the chat of an assignment that I have my students engage in, right? And we make it kind of fun, but then I also share a resource, explore.org, which is actually really nice. You can have, it's a web or it's an app or a website, and you can look at it just to kind of check out for a few minutes and just watch an aquarium of fish, which is, kind of nice and soothing. But there's also like cute kitten sanctuary videos and puppy videos and other things too, right? So, but I'm really intentional about beginning every class with, offering that type of resource for students so that they know that there are multiple ways for them to, and multiple resources on their own campus to really help improve their overall mental health and well-being. As somebody who's using these trauma-informed approaches as well, I also give a lot of decision-making over to students. And so in some cases, like, what would you prefer for this exam? Would you prefer, to handwrite equations or to have a quiz? Like what works, allowing that kind of differentiated instruction. And a part of that too is also for me intentional with the use of universal instructional design. So I'm not just relying on lecture recorded videos, but I have multiple opportunities for students to pick up information in the class and to learn information that sort of meets some of their needs. We live in Minnesota. Of course, George Floyd's murder was highly impactful, and the subsequent murders that we have experienced of Daunte Wright in our city and other folks of color. And so there's this additional burden of racialized stress and racialized trauma for a lot of our students as well. And so these trauma-informed approaches are helpful not just because of the pandemic, right, but because of all these really challenging situations that students have experienced. And of course, as one of the student panelists mentioned, that extends to international students who experience a lot of xenophobia and harassment and discrimination, right? So there's just a lot of folks right now who are really struggling in higher education, a lot of students who are really struggling. So being mindful of those things. And I know, Sarah, that you're asking a lot about some of those academic factors, but I'll say too that the financial factors are areas where we're seeing our biggest disparities among students, right? And so what we can kind of clearly see in the financial factors are pretty clear ways in which the pandemic has exacerbated some of the disparities that already existed before the pandemic. Specifically, big differences between students based on their social class, their parents' education, their caregiving status, whether they have disabilities, and whether they are members of other marginalized groups on campus. So we're seeing that sort of over and over. What we kind of found in our data, I think, is that it's not just the academic factors. And those were things, for instance, like students who lacked motivation for online learning, who lacked interaction and communication with classmates. So students were more likely to have major depressive disorder. Students who lacked access to their faculty, to learning support services, to advisors. Those students also had much higher levels of anxiety. And so just being sure to always provide those access points for students. And for me too, last thing I'll mention is that just as an instructor, for me, it's more like every class period is an opportunity to share with students about the things that are available for them on their campuses, but also just acknowledging that, like, I see you as a human being. I care about you. I want you to be successful. I'm here to be, to help you be successful. And so helping students to kind of break down those barriers that happen in this online space, I think is really important to me too.
So Bonnie, did you have anything you wanted to add? I was looking at the academic side, and I absolutely am happy to start to move into the non-academic side, because everyone's presentations also talked about that. It was like the two threads were the academic factors and the non-academic factors, and there was this focus on, like you mentioned, Krista, finances, and then other groups. So sense of belonging. Igor, you talked about different sense of belonging based on race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability status. So I'd love to hear feedback. And again, in interventions or aspirational interventions that you would like to see to support these students as individuals that we know based on the data are having a different experience.
Absolutely, I can start. I'm sure we're all familiar with how all humans have a hierarchy of needs, right? And the data really show so many students were experiencing things such as food insecurity, housing insecurity, lack of feeling safe in their own homes. And it's really hard, obviously, for students to succeed academically if they don't have those basic needs met. So for me, it's all very holistic in how all of these things are interacting, right? And so Krista and I talk a lot about kind of like these big ideal changes that we see in higher ed, but really access to healthy, nutritious foods, access to safe housing. Some universities will partner with local hotels or something if a student is unsafe in their own home to ensure that they're just getting that basic need met of feeling safe in their own home. And then also going back to that academic support, in addition to advising, just having advisors and faculty really having a basic understanding of mental health and resources on campus. The research shows that students who are most likely to experience mental health concerns, BIPOC students, LGBTQ students, et cetera, are also the least likely to reach out for that support. So ensuring that we are really proactive in offering those resources and making sure that the people who are on the front lines, if you will, are versed in these things and able to provide that support for students. I would say that's kind of a good place to start. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add onto that.
I'm happy to continue. So I think another element of this, I agree with Bonnie that this is, basic needs are they call basic for a reason, and this is, the foundation of, healthy climate and sense of belonging and academic success, and that's for sure. I also, when I was thinking about the pandemic and the transition to online, to remote instruction and to online communication, I think the quality of of online experience that you have also matters. And here's also some of it are basic needs, because we know that some students didn't have access to a computer, to a laptop, or they didn't have a good connection. And so I think these are another basic needs in terms of meaningful online experience, because if you don't have that, like no matter what's going on in class, if you cannot access it properly, that will be a challenge, that will be a problem. But and a lot of universities, and we saw that in the previous discussion, that a lot of universities addressed that. And they started, to loan laptops. They created other environments when students can access the internet. I even heard about like Wi-Fi parking lots when, students can access the internet from their cars, and other, very creative, solutions. Although the problem still exists, because even there is a computer, even there's a decent internet, where you live could be a challenge. There are students who reported they lived 6 people in a 1-bedroom apartment, and it's challenging. So but also on top of that, there should be I think as universities should, and we, of course, as part of the universities, we need to think more about what makes a quality online experience, because obviously these platforms, they also evolve. Like Zoom didn't have a lot of functions when we all started, and introduced much more like breakout rooms, like quizzes and other things, and polls and other things. So this, I think, this was helpful, but I don't think there's there was enough done in this area, and there definitely could be more going forward. And I actually have a question to Elisa about the peer mentoring program. I know that you're going back kind of in person, but I was wondering if you are going to retain some of the elements of this online experiences that students had, and whether some elements, show that they also, they're really working on something like that.
That's a big question, because that's literally what I got going right now, is to figure out what to keep and what not to keep, right? And our assessments over the past couple semesters have shown that we're doing a lot of great things, but it feels very in context for this setting. And so when we come back, again, we haven't had a mask policy in quite some time. We're fully reopened, full capacity. It's a different world down here in Texas, y'all. And it's just so interesting to imagine then what happens when I put 65,000 students back on this campus. And especially speaking to, just the experience, I come from it from a very programmatic, I guess, perspective, but how do I make up for the experience that my students, they might not think about it, but I think missed out on in their first year, their first semester, or even just that year, maybe a continuing student didn't get to have on campus. And so how do I give them that back? Or how do I give them tools, whether it's, bringing in some great formatting or structural elements of a class that really worked, or how do I create additional programming initiatives to really work for them? And so I guess to answer, I was thinking of how I'm going to answer this without almost verbally committing myself to too much. But right now we are considering a welcome back event, which would be an open house, but with a very specific agenda of, if you're a first year, let us show you things on campus. Let us show you the best study spot. Let us kind of get you caught up, almost like a campus boot camp, if you will. And then for those that haven't been here in 15 months, not only a welcome back, but a perspective shift of we learned how to do this really well. And now we're cycling back to a new normal that we're not even sure what it looks like. We're going to learn together, but just having them in a mental construct of we're going to change. We're going to continue molding this experience for you, but also prepping them for it. So almost like a primer of this next year is going to be a little messy, hang out with us. We're going to do it together. So we've been brainstorming as a dean's office up here of how to do that for our science students in particular. Whether it's, we make a closed-toed shoes initiative or something, to kind of play on lab safety or how we'll do that. But that's what we've been thinking about. And specifically with my peer mentors, I think about how can I put them in very visible places where my students, whether you're a first year or a third year, how you can see a peer mentor, know who they are, and also know how to reach out. So that's what I'm in the brainstorm mode of right now.
we're looking forward to hearing more of the outcomes after the brainstorming and the implementation. You have a lot ahead of you as you bring back all of those students back to campus. There's a great question. Thank you, Lois, in the chat. And it's something that I've been struck by as well. There's been this discussion of community building and community building being separate from sense of belonging. Other panelists have talked about the institutional or leadership support for community building. And Lois from UVA is asking a great question. How much do our institutions support and model community and community building, including engaging with their surrounding communities? And should we be asking students about sense of community? So if anybody would like to jump in and respond.
I'd love to share an idea that I just came across yesterday. Dr. Jeff Mayo out of UT Austin was presenting on Zoom to us about they actually do a belonging lesson plan within some of their courses, specifically for, first year experience, transfer year experience. So we're talking about new students on a campus, but there's a research study that they're implementing on how to help students think about belonging. And his quick synopsis was they give them a case study on how to belong, and then they have students reflect after their peer mentors kind of chime in on advice. And they ask students to reflect by writing a letter to a future student on the best advice they can give on belonging. And they're seeing really great outcomes of that. And so I would say that's a new idea for me, but also we do train our first year instructors on how to create community within our courses, especially our small first year experience courses, which have no more than 25 students. So I don't think, especially within first year experience or even first year courses, it's crazy to think about actually explicitly training instructors to think about and how to build community. We lump it with our inclusive and accessible classrooms. And so if maybe you're looking for a place to lump it into your trainings, that might be a great place too.
Yeah, I think this is thank you, Liz. I think this is a great idea, and for design and content work group who's working on the survey instrument, also to think about how do we capture that, and I couldn't help to mention that there's an interesting sitcom called Community. And it's about basically a community college, and the experience with classes there is pretty bad. So there are no real classes there. But what holds them, within this community college is their study group, and they are kind of attached to a study group. And I think my biggest takeaway from the first day actually is to I think the idea that a student has to have a place to go or a community to belong. That's a really good idea, and we probably need to think more how we capture that, in the surveys and otherwise in the data, and how to help students to find those groups, to find those connections, establish them, and develop this sense of community, sense of belonging.
So we have another question that came up in chat from Ola, which I think is something, Arena, I'd like for you to respond to, because you touched on it in your presentation. So the question is, if we are not going to move to a hybrid model where there is still some remote instruction happening, how do we serve those students who are thriving in remote instruction and are finding that particularly for students with some mental health issues like anxiety, are doing well in that environment. So I'd be interested in your thoughts about how we serve those students if we don't do hybrid, or whether hybrid is a good way to serve those students moving forward.
Frankly, I think I'm not the best person to answer this question, as I told you in the beginning about the context of in Russia. So we just started paying attention to students' well-being and mental health. So now we're more looking at the experience of other universities who are more advanced in these issues. So that's why I just would like to skip this question and pass to other colleagues.
I can tap in, if you will. I think, you know, exploring with the students, what is the underlying anxiety that's keeping them from wanting to be in the classroom, right? Have they experienced microaggressions in the classroom? Are there like power imbalances at play that may be keeping them from the classroom? And I think in order to figure out what that is, you know, maybe the advisor works with the student, but unless the student has like a specific diagnosis of like agoraphobia, where they're fearful of being in certain places, I think a lot of times that anxiety is a signal that there's something else that is occurring within that student's life. And I think there is something that we can do to support that student.
I also would like to briefly address this question, and I'm also thinking about, you know, about this. And I think that, again, online experiences, they are limited, but also they provide us with sometimes with more options and more features than in class experiences. And one of those features is, and we found this in the zero data. So if we consider low-income students, they are like, when they reported the benefits of online learning, online experiences, one of the things they reported is that one of the advantages they see is that it became easier for them to participate in online in-class discussions. And the reason is that within the Zoom, there are basically two modalities, two ways of participating in discussions. One is, you know, with a kind of a more structured way, more similar to in-person experiences, when the instructor calls on you and you respond, and there's like, there's the structure, right? And there's kind of a more, so to say, democratic way, you know, in chat, and like a low stakes type of intervention and discussion. So, and a lot of students found it very useful to actually, you know, to ask questions that they wouldn't otherwise didn't ask in class, because it's easier to type something in chat, and like it's, you need to really put yourself together and ask a question, you know, in class. So I think that there are some aspects of online learning that are kind of a more advanced than in person. And I agree that we need to think more about, you know, the advantages of hybrid modalities beyond just recording lectures, because there is a value in online interaction. Obviously, you know, shouldn't be just the online interaction, but, you know, some aspects of it are pretty valuable.
Thanks, Igor. I think we have time for one last question from Tongshen. He's asking, as hate crimes are increasing, do you know how concerned students are about campus and community safety? And do you know if your institutions will do anything additionally to ensure student safety on campus after it reopens? Which I think is an important question, as we framed this discussion at the beginning with these basic needs. You know, safety being chief among some of those basic needs. So would any panelists like to respond about ensuring student safety on campus and knowing how your students are feeling about their safety?
I'll just share that that's just a very touchy, tricky subject at the University of Minnesota right now, where our students are actively trying to reduce the power of our police on campus, given all of the events that happened with George Floyd and Dante Wright. And so that's particularly challenging in terms of general crime. And we're seeing an uptick in crime on campus as well. With regards to like bias and hate crimes, we do have, you know, some online mechanisms for reporting those events for students, kind of like a bias response network as well. So, you know, that's already in place, but you know, moving forward, that it just remains a really tough topic on our campus. We've actually hired an external consultant to come in and review our police force as well, and provide some recommendations moving forward. So I don't think we have an easy answer for that one.
Well, I don't have any data in front of me, at least on our climate in terms of safety. I will say, again, coming from a programmatic view of how do we structurally build in either education or conversations within a student's college experience on respect, inclusion, diversity. And we've, as a university, chosen to implement a requirement for all first-year students in their first term to not only complete trainings online, but also within their first year experience course, which all students are in. There is a dedicated week on respect and inclusion. They actually complete the identity wheel, which if you've done that activity, I feel is pretty moving and important for students to experience. And they have small group discussions. And so when we were thinking about it, we were thinking more, I think, in a structural way of how do we implement this across the board for students to be having more conversations, but also to have education and resources shared broadly. So in terms of kind of a broad, big picture, that's what Texas A&M has chosen to do.
This is actually related to safety, but I think what will happen, like my big concern is how universities, like, change is always hard, and my concern is how university will, you know, structure back everything they switched to online, you know, a year and a half ago, because it's when you settled and when you have everything, you know, in a way you've done in the past and you like got used to it, it's like really easy. It's much easier. But when campuses will shift, you know, learning back, it will be again a learning curve for students to kind of to get used to it, and for instructors as well, and for services, like to actually see people, to communicate. And I agree that, you know, Tansha, I think, you know, the hate crimes are very important to address, because there will be a lot of different new situations that will, you know, trigger them. Because people will learn again how to do it, how to live on campus, how to study on campus, and there will be many kind of a new awkward situation, many kind of a misunderstandings, and that, you know, how some people behave and others, you know, they don't support that, and so there will be this is my concern too, and I think it should be like addressed in return to campus plans and other kind of programs that are on campuses right now.
And I would add to return to campus resources. I think there's been a lot of great ideas that we've talked about just in this hour, but then each panelist talked about in their presentations about where resources can be invested to increase students' health and well-being. I think we have some decisions to make about how we spend our resources to support our students. And before we close, the one thing that I wanted to add that we didn't get to talk about is investing in our faculty, because so many times we have found through hearing from individual students and looking at the data that individual faculty are so important in this work, and especially at our research AAU universities, our faculty are, uniquely charged to be conducting research. There's a lot that they are charged with. So finding those opportunities to support them appropriately so they can do some of this work that we know is so key to how our students feel and experience our institutions. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the faculty as well. Also, thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you for your scholarship, and thank you for your participation today. Thank you for joining, everyone. I really appreciated this discussion, and I'll turn it back over to you, Igor.
Thank you, Sarah. This was excellent. Excellent. So I thank you as a panelist and as a symposium organizer twice. I think this was great, a great discussion and a great first day. Great start. I hope so. Tomorrow will be focused on program climate in doctoral education. Hope to see you there as well, and we'll have more exciting, panels and presentations lined up. Thank you so much. It's been a great discussions and a great first day.